they would send you out with a 16 millimeter wind up camera, an old Bell and Howell. We were still shooting film back then, way back. And and so you had to process the film, and then you had to edit the film. And the way you edited film back then was you had to literally scrape the emulsion off, chop it, and then re-glue it where you wanted the next shot to come up. And which is all extremely time consuming. Plus, once you chop it, there's no putting it back together. Once you shoot it, there was no re-racing and reshooting. So we thought we'd died and gone to heaven when we started getting electronic news gathering stuff, ENG. And I wound up, when I graduated with my BBA, I went full time working for KNOE, and that's how I wound up in journalism. You know, TV is basically all the same everywhere. It just depends on the size of the crew and how many people you're working with and what their duties are. When you're working at the local level, you do it all. But that's good because you learn it all. But when you're at a much higher level, then all that stuff is usually done for you. And if you're the correspondent, you basically just show up, and they shoot everything else, including your stand-ups, and that's it. You go home. Me just do it. I like to shoot. See, so I preferred, especially starting out, I preferred to shoot my own stuff. I did. And I still to this day do it. I mean, with the iPhone 13. You know, being basically a 2K camera, you can shoot a lot of stuff now just holding it up, just like I, shot Jules' soccer game this morning. So it's so much easier and so much more compact now, and you can just whip it out and shoot and go. When I started out, you had a 16 millimeter camera that had a sound system in it that required a mag stripe to go along next to the film itself, and so you had to carry the camera, which itself was about 35-40 pounds. And then you had to carry a tripod, which was back then were not aluminum. They were made out of steel. It was pretty heavy. Then you had to carry a battery belt. The battery belt alone was 30 pounds. So you really had about 120 pounds of gear that you had to haul around to do basically what you could do now with an iPhone 13. Or any iPhone that, shoots video. And so you have to be young and somewhat healthy to be able to do that. And I love those years. That's where you get your training. And the good thing about film is that it taught you to edit in the camera, because you knew you couldn't reshoot. You only could, and you were trying to save yourself steps later so that you didn't have to cut between every shot in the editing process. Now you do it all electronically and you offload it onto a system where you can just simply, on the computer, hit some buttons. Back then you physically tore the film. And so you learned how to edit, but you also learned composition, shot composition, that kind of thing. And you learned it quickly because you had to. It was out of necessity. And so that still sticks with me today. I did it all at some point all together because I preferred to go out and shoot my own things for the morning show. So when I was anchoring a show, then I knew the story because I was involved in the story, and it wasn't just a matter of either shooting it or having somebody else shoot it for me. So I preferred to do that when time would permit, but there is only a certain amount of energy that you have, and if you have to get up at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning to go in a morning show, sometimes you say, shoot it, you shoot it, and do the best you can. But that didn't happen that often. Usually my time was spent with a photographer. So it was just a two-man cruise, me and then him. And in the bigger crews, like for Good Morning America, you had a photographer, a sound man, a producer, and then me. And so the producer would stand over your back, really basically behind you, and as you asked questions to somebody, she would ask for clarification. And so sometimes that was a nuisance. It took a little while to get used to that, but she was always trying to rush the subject up for time. So if a person took too much time answering a question, she would say, now, that's good, but rush that up. Let's see if we can say that faster. Because she was always conscious about time. You only had, at the most for a Good Morning America piece, we had about 3.5 minutes. And the way I did interviews back then using the 16 millimeter camera, it had a lens, a beautiful lens that was about out to here. And so you held it on your shoulder. You didn't have time to set up a tripod. You got your microphone in the input, and then a stick mic, and there was no wireless. It was all wired, And so you had to conduct your interviews like this. So you're holding the camera, holding the mic, making sure the level's right, making sure the light's right, and asking the questions.
Right.
So you're doing this back and forth. Well, I did interview Ronald Reagan one time when he was running, before he ran in 1980, in the end of the 1970s. And then later went up and did a quick interview with him in the Oval Office on his birthday in 1983. So it was, and it was not anything that I did. It's we'd had floods in 1982, and I had stories that went nationally for about the flood. And then we had a group in Monroe that was associated with the Chamber of Commerce, and they put up a big billboard that said, "Thank you, Mr. President," because when Ronald Reagan came to Monroe on New Year's Day 1983, that attracted the national press. And then we had all kinds of people who started sending things to people in Monroe who'd been flooded out. And again, one-man band. You're filming. At that time, we did have ENG by then, so I was shooting video, but you still had about a 40-pound, 3/4-inch videotape pack that was on you with the camera and the lights, and you only had about 20 minutes. You had about 20 minutes of electricity in the battery, and you only had 20 minutes on a 3/4-inch reel. So, in other words, when you went in, you had to be fully charged, and you had to have a full, because you didn't know how long you were going to be in there. And you didn't want anything to die on you. The last place that you want to have anything die on you is in the Oval Office. I couldn't go in with the group from Monroe. I had to come in where the press comes in. And so I was in the West Wing, and the other group went through the main part of the White House. And she handed me off to these two Secret Service guys, and they take me out into a dark corridor. I remember that to the right there was a fire door, I guess it went to the outside. To the left was a hallway that went down to the to the president's home. And straight ahead there was a small little alley that had a wheelchair ramp. And as it appeared that as the farther you went down, the narrower it got. And there were no lights. There was only a window that was one of those kind of thin windows about halfway down. And so the Secret Service guys held me at the door, and I was like, and I've got the camera going. I mean, like, I don't have time for it to warm up once I get in there. And I said, "Look, are we going to go in?" And they didn't say anything. And they had the sunglasses on. It's dark in there, and they had the little earpieces in, and they didn't say anything. And so I had to put everything on standby because I didn't want to run out of battery while I was in the Oval Office. And so finally I said, "So do y'all come here often? I mean, I'm trying to get a rise out of them." And they started laughing, chuckling a little bit. And so the next thing I know, they pick me up by my elbows, and we go forward. So we head down into this, and we're three abreast. So we're all kind of scrunched up trying to get down this little corridor. And I remember the Secret Service guy put his hand up on the wall, and he pushed it. And the wall opened up, and it was a door. And we walked through that door, and Ronald Reagan was sitting 6 feet from me to the left, next to the fireplace in the Oval Office. And so I'm in there, and I'm shooting some video. And back in that day, you had to do a white card, and you had to balance the color. The color temperature inside the Oval Office is great because they have these, it has a recessed concave ceiling, and in the lip, it's got daylight balanced light. So everything in there is even. The lighting inside the Oval Office is even. And so we're in there, and one of the guys introduces me to the president, and I just asked for a quick statement, and he said something like, Nancy and I we have a soft place in our heart for the folks and I went, and he goes, "Monroe." And so we had our soundbite, and then basically after that, the Secret Service guys came over again and got me by my elbows, and they led me out of the Oval Office, and I shot all the way out, and we went out back down that corridor, and we were done. The thing about, now I'm writing long form books and biographies, and so the thing about television news is that it's so brief that you spend more of your time looking for things to edit out as opposed to things to include. So I'd always overshoot. I was probably shooting 20 to 1, and when I would get back to the office, and it was my fault because I'd have to weed through all that stuff and weed through long interviews and weed through all the video, and then decide. That's when you decided what you couldn't include, because you only had, at that time, I only had a minute and a half to tell somebody's life story, so I had 90 seconds. Now they would let me sometimes on features go to 3 minutes, but that was rare, because as their back time in a show, producers' back time in a show, it depends on the spot load, the advertisements inside the show, and it also depended, on what else was happening that day. It also depended on weather. It also depended on how long was the sportscast. So they had, 28:30 to fill the newscast, and I mean from 6 to 6:30, and that was it. And so a producer did not appreciate people who would go out and shoot long stories and say it was a minute and a half, and then it wound up being 2 minutes, because then you lost 30 seconds. And I never wanted to be that person, though I was that person from time to time. And you learn brevity. And then as I got into bigger, longer pieces, you felt like you had more latitude, and so you could go for 3 minutes, and you could ask people, more in-depth, insightful questions, and try to give them more time so the story could breathe. So that's what we called it. Let the story breathe. News is, pretty cut and dried, but when you're trying to profile somebody, you're trying to, get inside what their minds and hearts are about, and you really still only have about maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes to tell that whole story. I don't think it's much different, because I covered politics. I covered, for crying out loud, I did the biography on Edwin Edwards, who was about the most controversial governor that we've had since Huey Long. So controversy is not new to me, and it's not new to the population. What's new is you have so many different avenues now where you can get information. And the older I get, the more I think we have too many avenues, because it's a constant interruption, and you don't really know who's telling the truth and who's not, because now we find that people have more agendas than ever before. And maybe news organizations have an agenda. And when I was in news, I was taught you do a balance. If you're going to go out and do a story, find out a point, counterpoint. Find out somebody who's for it, and find out somebody who's against it, and try to balance the two so that people can make a better judgment as to which one they really want to believe. Now, people can go out and do a whole one-sided story, and that's considered the story. And I don't, I don't think that served us well, because I think the country now is more polarized than it's ever been. So, in my day when I started out, I had news directors, particularly one, Earl Casey, who helped Ted Turner start CNN, and was with them for like 35 years. And Earl was a stickler for balance. Now, don't come in here with just that person's interview. If you can't get the other person's interview, then we don't run the story. And of course, then the question becomes, well, are you going to be first? Because every news organization wants to be first. But being first and accurate is the key. First is only part of it. But then again, I come from the day of Walter Cronkite, and Walter Cronkite required all of his reporters at CBS News to have had at least 2 years of newspaper experience. Newspapers, as opposed to broadcast, require you to flesh out the story in total, because you have to have all the elements in there, because you got 5 column inches to fill. In news, again, you only have a minute and a half to tell the whole story. So you can kind of get by with not having the in-depth details, but you still should know them. And that's just all part of it. It's part of the journalism thing. And you're kind of built for that. In order to be a journalist, you've got to be curious. You have to have a natural curiosity about the world around you and about your community and about different things. It can't be just the things that you want to highlight, because you'll have to go out and cover a school board meeting or a Metro Council meeting or something like that, and it's boring as all get out. But at the end of it, these are talking about real issues that affect real lives and laws that affect us going forward and affect every generation as it comes. So it is important. So some people just want to be on TV, and some people want to be real journalists, and I prefer to be the real journalist.